Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Hello, this is Jamie Saponaro and Jerry Kimball from LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. Today, we are talking about what it takes to make learning stick. You know, Jerry, it really is dependent on the instructional strategies often that we are employing in the classroom to really help kids to be critical thinkers and really take in that information, but making it their own. And hopefully we'll hear a lot about that today from our guest.
That's right. That is what it takes to make it stick, because we teach so many things that we all forget in a week, so we do want the learning to stick. But I just have to say, last night I was at a celebration for an educator, all educators in the room, right? And one of them said, "Oh, when the pandemic hit, my first class was kindergarten." And you could hear the whole room go, "Oh, like, how do you deal with that?" These little ones with technology is really a spot that I think could use some growth. And we are fortunate today to have Debbie on our podcast because this is her wheelhouse. This is what she does. So we are really happy to have her here today. I met Debbie on Clubhouse. I was moderating a room for her. And as I was moderating, I was taking notes and thinking, she mentioned so many things I never thought of, like being able to identify the icons and what they mean. And it's kind of an icon literacy things. It just blew my mind. And I thought we have to have her on the podcast. But I'll tell you what, she's one busy lady. She had 9 presentations last week. She's doing 2 podcasts today. And her Kindle book is coming out. And her paperback book is already out. So wow, we're lucky to be able to squeeze her in on her busy schedule. So welcome, Debbie. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Oh, we're excited. We're excited to hear from you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became so passionate about working with young children? That doesn't surprise me, but young children and technology. That one's the difficult part.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just finished up my 21st year in education and my 3rd year as a tech coach. And I've always wanted to be an educator. I remember even as young as 8, doing the Raggedy Ann chalkboard and wanting to teach. But it's always been a passion. I've always loved working with kids, especially young kids, and helping them to find meaning in something that might have been considered complicated for them, even at a young age. I was creating services for young children and, in my faith and things like that, just to help them understand things. And when I went to college, I originally wanted to be a French teacher, elementary school French teacher. And in my first year of teaching, I discovered Scholastic and the magic when my students actually had an authentic audience to publish to. And from there, decided to get my master's in technology back in 2002. And so much has changed in a lot of ways, but so much also stays the same because we're still trying to provide those opportunities with tech. And in 2017, when I joined Twitter, I found that there were even more opportunities and more resources than I could have ever imagined. And in 2018, when I became a tech coach, I was suddenly tasked with working with K-6 kids as part of our master schedule for specials. And kindergarten was a challenge for me, to say the least. And one morning I was actually listening to a different podcast, the 10-Minute Teacher podcast that Vicki Davis does. And she was interviewing Pana Asavatana. And she was talking about how her students had struggled with iPads and that, she was trying to help them as a technology, specialist. But no matter what she did, kids were shoving iPads in her faces and she just didn't know what to do. And as she talked, this really resonated with me. And so she continued and talked about the fact that she needed to give kids something sticky, something to give handles so they could hold on to the technology. And she started talking about icons, and she compared the idea of icons in the video to the idea of you wouldn't give a kid a book and not show them how to use letters. And so I really loved what she said, and I started playing around with it. And so she had mentioned using it in a morning message. I added it into a morning message, explicitly teaching my kindergarten students the icons. And all of a sudden magic started to happen, because once they were able to recognize the icons, just like they were learning to recognize letters, that literacy was built. And I started noticing I was getting more and more of these icons in, and I ended up building an icon literacy wall in my computer lab, my technology lab. And
that's brilliant idea. Yeah.
And one thing that's really cool is that sometimes what's good for littles is also good for bigs. Well, my 5th and 6th graders were like, what's this? And they ended up using them as well. And it's kind of just grown. The next year I was using them as part of my learning targets, adding them really, instead of having a morning message, having it very visually based, so there were no words to worry about. But it's just amazing as we teach our students that, how helpful that is. Because if you look at a lot of programs we use, icons are universal everywhere. So we really empower our students to have agency over their work when we teach them those icons. And it's just been an amazing process for me to be part of as far as my work with the littles.
Yeah, such intentionality there, because we just gloss over that. We think, oh, they're digital natives, they know what that is, but evidently that is not the case. So I love that idea. That is great.
I love it too. I always say that curriculum, instruction, and social emotional learning have to play the lead, yet technology is there as the supporting role, right? So it's really important that technology integration is intentional. We have to consider the SAMR model, right? So how do you determine if technology is enhancing a lesson? And then can you give us some ideas about how you can purposefully implement technology integration, even blended learning, into the classroom?
Sure. So in the book that I just put out, Transform Techie Notes to Make Learning Sticky, I have a whole chapter really dedicated to this. And it talks about what I consider my transform tech tools. And so I have 10 tech tools that I really focus on in that chapter. And so they have to give you opportunities not possible without the technology. They really have to be versatile. They can't just be used for one thing, but they have to be used with things, any subject, any age. And then they have to give something that's you can't have without that tech, that really enhances. And so my feeling is that when we think about blended learning, we want to use that technology, like you said, very intentionally. Are we giving kids an opportunity to do something? So like an example, Pear Deck is one that we use a lot in my school. Well, without Pear Deck, you get maybe 4 kids raising a hand for every question. You don't get that same opportunity so that everyone can participate, and that intentional feedback back where you're also able to get some formative learning. Everyone is involved. So something like that is really simple, but really powerful. When you're talking about blended learning, the idea of using something like Edpuzzle for videos to get that formative data. A lot of times I feel like people feel like when they're talking about technology that everything has to be done on the computer. And doing technology for technology's sake is never best practice. We have to be able to do something. So as you're talking about the SAMR model, well, I have teachers who will say, well, can you put this worksheet and then can I make it, an editable PDF? Well, what are you gaining from that? If you're not gaining something from it, then that's not a good use of it. But yet, if you're going to take it and put it in there, we're going to put hyperlinks in there, and we're going to create more of a hyperdoc where the kids have direct choice and voice, then that's different. So really, I always find when I'm working with teachers, figuring out what are our lesson goals, what are our objectives, and then figuring out in what ways tech can enhance that experience. Because there are some experiences tech doesn't enhance, but there's a lot that it does.
Yeah, there has to be a why. There has to be a reason for using it. And just as you mentioned, formative assessment is a great tool. Of course, something like Edpuzzle is terrific because kids can stop, rewind, rewatch, and really engage with the content. And like you mentioned, some kids don't feel comfortable asking questions in front of a whole group of kids. So this way they can rewind, listen again, and then they are answering questions. And sometimes they're lower level questions, sometimes they're a little bit deeper, which is great. but it gives the teacher then a starting point for where do we go next? Now I can decide, am I going to have to reteach? Am I going to have to, maybe I'll pull a guided group or a strategy group to get these kids up to speed who really obviously didn't understand the concept. So why are we using Edpuzzle? Well, for a variety of, to hit all those learning styles and also get some formative data in there to better drive my instruction. So that why is evident.
Yeah. And, one of the things that it's really struck me is that, during all of the things that have happened over the past year and a half, the idea that people, feel like they have to show a video to the whole group. I'm like, but why would you do that? We really want to give our kids. And one of the things I found when I was using things like Edpuzzle, when I was in the classroom, I especially loved it for math because I could gather that formative data and I could have targeted instruction that met my students' needs. And you can't do that. That's something that isn't possible without the technology. And so, really honing in on that and looking at ways that we can really get those, they still call them 21st century skills. I don't like that term, get those really, somebody had, I think it's Hans Apple calls them the human skills, get those human skills really, and emphasize them because that's what they're going to need in the future. We really have to push those things, and technology gives us an opportunity to do so much of that.
Well, you've said a few things that I kind of want to go a little bit deeper on. First of all, that SAMR model, it seems like when you are targeting technology, you are really looking at being a creator and not a consumer. And I think that's really important. And also, I like that you're choosing things that can be used in a variety of ways so that we don't have to use so many tools. I remember when the iPad came out and teachers were going crazy about apps. And I had a friend that said the best app is when you open it up, it's blank. And teachers were like, why would we want that? And the whole point is to be a creator and not a consumer. And so I just wanted to make that point. I think that that's so important. The other thing is, as we have gone through the pandemic, it's kind of like the 3 Ps. We've had the pandemic, and then we had panic. And now I think we're to the point where we have some possibilities. But as we move forward, it's so easy to move back to what we were doing before. So you are so adept at all of this. What can you say to people what are the possibilities as we move forward? And I'd really like to know about blended learning because we're going back in the classroom in a lot of places. So what are some possibilities for blended learning, and why should teachers take the time to record those videos and do those things?
Well, I think that the whole idea of videos was where I was going to start with that. All of our students learn at different paces. And so when you record that video, Edpuzzle allows you to, take your own videos, add those questions and do those voiceovers or, use other videos. You're giving your students control. We want to have student-centered classrooms. And by doing that, you're allowing them to get that information the way they need it. And then you're also able to gather that formative data because the goal of blended learning is not to take away from the teacher. The teacher is not a role that's ever going to go away. That relationship piece is so critical. But if you've given them some of that information in advance and then you can see where they need to go, then you're able to pull those small groups. I'm a huge proponent of small groups. And then you're able to give them those experiences and really dig down deep, really get to those deeper levels of thinking when you're working with those small groups. And, I just think that that's so important. If we're showing a video to everybody at the same time, I used to be, we'll show a video because that's easy. But videos should not be easy. Videos are intentional learning tools that help students to learn. And so, rather than, saying we're going to watch all of this together, watch this, get that formative data, and then give the kids what they need. And that's so important, that we do that because we can take some of these more, what would necessarily have been before a whole group lesson, and we can really make those individualized learning experiences. And I think that that's so key. And really understanding that when you're doing that blended learning model that it isn't only about technology. Blended learning is infusing those technology rich experiences that our students need with that face-to-face. And so like in our district this year, we're going one-to-one officially, even though we were one-to-one last year. But a lot of teachers have spent a lot of time working on this emergency virtual teaching model. Well, last year it was all about survival. But we really need to be intentional and think about what did we do this year that really worked? And how can we take those lessons forward? So many of my teachers really got good at creating those video experiences where they got that data. Most of my teachers got really good at using Pear Deck, so all students were able to participate and be involved. Well, those aren't things that go away because we're back in the classroom. Those are instructional tools that are really valuable. And so, in the real world, students are going to need to be able to, use the technology and collaborate together and use those critical thinking skills and create things. Well, the technology is still a valuable tool, even when we're in person. And it might be even more valuable because as you're working on something and you're creating something in a group, then you get to have that rich conversation as well. So I really feel like as we move forward, that's going to be just so important that we really think about what went well, how can we build on it? Because I joke that all of my teachers got really good at making Google Slides this year. So they all now have that skill of making Google Slides. Well, now can we look at how we're using those Google Slides and really intentionally use them in a very purposeful way? Because Google Slides isn't just used for presentations. It can be used for a very interactive learning experience.
Absolutely. I had a couple of teacher friends tell me that when they created those videos that you're talking about for their blended learning classroom, it's like it replicated them 15 times over because some students are watching the video, others you're going deeper with, and they said it really freed up my time to develop relationships. And I don't think we always realize that. And we know how important relationships are as we
And I
Yes.
think too, what your point about, teachers kind of having to jump right in and use some of these tools during the pandemic. Now they can reflect and say, oh, I can actually leverage this to be more efficient, to allow students to process information and really to get back that time that I need face to face in small groups or one-on-one with the students. And I'm going to have the data now in order to know how to drive that instruction in those instructional scenarios. So that's, this is something that now, and I always use the example too of flipped classroom. Sort of teachers were doing that during the pandemic and not really realizing it. And it may have been something that they kind of put to the side and really didn't want to investigate or didn't have time to investigate. Now they were forced right in it and they realize, oh, wow, this is really great. I can give them these videos. They can interact, go beyond. They can dig deeper. They can spend more time. They can ask for more time with me. And then the teacher obviously can have the personalized learning experiences for the students in the classroom because that other information was provided to them. They absorbed it. And now it's used as data to move forward. So it's just a really, there's so many different things that teachers were able to learn in these past 10, 12 months that they're hopefully going to be carrying with them through the regular scenario.
And in addition, teachers are more comfortable being in front of a camera. I think that that's another big thing that we need to acknowledge. I mean, think about how much time educators now spend in front of cameras.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a hesitation, right? Because
I know, like when I first was doing stuff on camera, I had hesitations. I remember the first Flipgrid video I ever made and how many times I felt like I had to redo it because it had to be perfect.
Right.
And we've kind of gotten past some of that now.
Right.
And, one of the tools that I do love to use for some of those videos, making them at least to start, is Flipgrid because it gives you that 10-minute boundary and it allows you to also do that screen recording part with it. And so we need to also be intentional about the length of our videos. I think the rule is 1 minute more than the age. Our goal is not to make a video that's going to last forever. Our goal is to really be intentional. And I know, like, a lot of times when I'm working with students, those videos are a way for them to review directions, to review how to do a process, but it's a way that they can watch things step by step. And so we don't want it to be super long. We want to really create powerful short videos. And so it doesn't have to be an elaborate process. So we really have to be intentional with that as well.
Yeah, it's got to be chunked. It's got to be, as you said, no longer in minutes than the students are in age, and sometimes even less than that. I've learned too. But then also the most important component of any video tool is that pause and rewind button. It really, really is. And even if you're doing it, I always told teachers that too, whenever, if they did show a video in person. I mean, it's not about showing the video and sitting at your desk, right? It's about showing the video, stopping, pausing, talking about it. But then also, as you said, giving it to them individually so that kids can process in the way that they need to.
So Debbie, tell us a little bit about your book. What would we find in your book?
Absolutely. So my book is Transform.
Oh yes, we want to see it.
Isn't it beautiful?
Oh yes, love it.
Wow.
And I love the title. Say the full title. It's amazing.
Transform, Techie Notes to Make Learning Sticky.
Yes, and I love the transform.
Yeah, so transform is actually an acronym. So each letter of the word stands for a chapter in my book.
Oh, cool.
And
Very intentional.
Very intentional. That's why they're sticky. Yeah, that's why it's done the way it is. And transform really, in essence, started out as me telling my story. It's become a lot more than that. I started blogging about 2.5 years ago. And when I first started blogging, I was terrified. And Sam Festich, who does Edumagic, was like, I sent her an advanced copy of my website. Like, what do you think? And she was like, put it out there. People need to hear your story. And so basically Transform is in 3 different parts. And so the T is turning away from closed doors. And it really tells my education origin story, which is not a perfect story. I have had plenty of experiences with ups and downs, with unsuccessful experiences, and having to be resilient and get through things. And so it really takes you on that journey and takes you through, school systems I worked where things weren't so great and things were better, and et cetera. I've worked in, a couple different school systems because I moved states a few years ago. But it takes you through those earlier years and then takes you to the point where I find technology. And in the second chapter, I talk about revisiting education technology's role in education, that whole transform tech tool thing that I mentioned earlier. And then that first part ends with me talking about amplifying learning using creativity. I'm a huge proponent of Project Zero's thinking routines. I really think it helps our students critically consume and create representations of their thinking. But I also believe in creativity and looking at creativity in much broader terms. Some people say you're creative and they think that you're really artistic, but that's not necessarily true. There's so many different types of creativity. And so it digs a little bit into that in that first part, in that chapter on amplifying learning. Then the book really goes and talks about those next steps. I spend time talking about what we've talked about as well, nurturing that agency and really empowering our students. How I began my journey with icon literacy, how I found I had to really promote my learners with a sense of that they had the answers within them and give them language that really focused on their own initiative. Talks about the role of video and some of the ways I empower students' voice and choice inside of my learning experiences. And it gives examples of programs I use and why I use them. Everything is very intentional. Like when I talk about the programs in the second chapter, here's what I use, here's why I use it, and even has QR codes to explain how to use them. So it's very user friendly. Then it takes a little bit of a turn and it focuses on educators, because we have to empower ourselves as educators to be really good educators. We have to focus on lifelong learning. And so in the chapter which is S, it's really talking about seeking connections beyond your school. It was really important to me. I kind of share my story with it, but it's so important that we talk to other people outside of our own school walls and we build those connections. Then it talks about strategies to find your PLN and really build it. Really talks about, there's so many amazing organizations now that can help you build your PLN and be part of your PLN. I'm very fortunate to be part of some of those. I'm a Teach Better ambassador. Because I'm a Road to Awesome author, I'm also kind of part of Code Breaker. So I've had lots of amazing experiences through that. And then the last part really focuses on taking your transformation to the next step, offering your voice. It shares my blogging journey, starting to present. Sometimes we have to know that our story is unlike anyone else's, and it's okay to put your voice out there. It's scary, but sometimes you have to get past that fear. And it talks about ways that you can reach beyond your expectations. And then it ends with some of those lessons that we talked about from COVID and how can we maximize learning's impact using some of those lessons. So it really kind of takes you on a journey, giving you a little bit of a framework, but I'm really excited about it. Feedback I've gotten so far has been super positive, and I'm just hoping educators who might be grappling with what to do next, this will give them some guidance and help them figure it out.
And I like that you also showed some of the bumps that you came across. I think that's important, that people don't see that it's perfect, because it's not. And kudos to you for being able to share those with people. Makes a difference.
I really feel like in my journey with blogging, I've become much more vulnerable. And, it's people at the beginning of my teaching journey, I viewed vulnerability as a weakness, and I now view it as a strength. I'm very transparent about the journeys I'm going on and the journeys I've been on. It's not always easy, but if educators think that everything comes easy for every educator, which is kind of what I thought in the past, then they're going to feel deficient. We're all dealing with struggles. We're all going through that. And so there's no judgment. Being a risk taker is a good quality, and it should be something that's embraced.
It's so true. I always say that the best teachers are risk takers. I mean, only through struggle are we going to have that growth. So it's really important. Now, where can we find your book, and where can we find you online?
So you can find my book on Amazon, and by looking up Transform Techie Notes to Make Learning Sticky. It actually was released on my birthday last month, which was super cool. So the print version came out on my birthday last month, and now it is also available on Kindle, which I'm really excited about, because I have some friends who said it's, they prefer Kindle because they're overseas. So I'm excited to let them get their hands on it. But besides that, Tannenbaum Tech is pretty much where you can find all of my stuff. My website, my blog, and then on Instagram, LinkedIn, Clubhouse, Twitter, Tannenbaum Tech is my handle. I now have a Facebook group for Tannenbaum Tech, and the goal is just to support educators finding ways to use technology to amplify student learning, and really promoting that whole idea. Because to me, when I do a presentation, it's not about me just doing that presentation, but to me, that's kind of like an appetizer. A presentation should be the start of a relationship. And so that's really what I'm trying to build, is relationships, just like I do with my teachers at school, where we can all work and support each other, because education is not an easy job, but it's an extremely rewarding job. And we all have to work together to make it the best it can possibly be.
Absolutely. Well, Debbie, we usually ask these 3 lightning round questions, and I think you've answered all of them already in what we've talked about. And we appreciate that. We've always enjoyed hearing what a favorite tech tool or website is. You've mentioned so many. Is there one that stands out to you?
I really think my favorite tech tool is Google Slides, because there's so much you can do with it.
Right.
Jamboard is becoming a close second, because it's all of a sudden really upped its game. So I've been using Jamboard a lot more, but I love everything you can do with Google Slides, how you can really create experiences where, it's more than just a slideshow. And I joke that I use Google Slides for everything. I create all my graphics with Google Slides. I use it to, do some, create your own adventure things, to make hyper slides and things like that. So I really love using it, because it really does give so many possibilities.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for joining us today and hearing about your book and hearing about the ways that you're helping teachers be more intentional about what they're doing. So we hope that we will put all of this in the show notes so people will know how to get a hold of you and your book and that information. We appreciate that. And I hope our listeners will check out Debbie's book. Sounds exciting. I know I'm going to check it out this afternoon. I'm going to do the Kindle thing, I think.
Yay.
And yes. So if our listeners would do us a favor and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any of our episodes, we would appreciate that. We are now moving forward into offering some PD points for listening to our podcasts, and we will be releasing some of those soon. So we're excited because our guests have so much to offer and so much deeper thinking. So thank you, Debbie, for being a part of our show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.